bombs explode at the Boston Marathon.
It was horrible. The scene that you saw was frickin' horrible.
There was chaos at the finish line.
It's so terrifying, it's so scary, and there was smoke and glass everywhere.
At least 2 are dead, many dozens hurt.
This is the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley.
Good evening. A terrible day. Witnesses say it sounded like thunder. 2 bombs went off as dozens of runners were crossing the finish line at the Boston Marathon today. One explosion near the reviewing stand at the finish line injured bystanders, knocked many runners off their feet, and seconds later, another blast about 2 blocks away. At least 2 people are dead, although that number is expected to change. Dozens more than 50 have been hurt, some of them critically. Rescuers pulled the injured away in wheelchairs. Boston police have urged people to go home and avoid large crowds just to be safe. The attack came at the end of the Boston Marathon, a grueling 26-mile race from Hopkinton, Massachusetts to downtown Boston, ending on Boylston Street, where the explosions occurred. We have a team of correspondents covering every angle of this attack, and we'll begin tonight with Terrell Brown in Boston.
Scott, Boston police have sealed off the streets here in the city of Boston, and many of the people that you see walking around, we've seen runners here, we see spectators as well. Many people standing around just searching for answers still at this point. Police vehicles driving up and down the streets here. We've seen the SWAT team and SWAT teams also moving around, helicopters hovering around overhead. We're actually 3 blocks away right now from where the initial explosion, that first explosion, happened. The explosion went off at the most crowded points of the race. 12 seconds later, there was a second explosion just a couple blocks away.
It's so terrifying, it's so scary, and it was so loud.
I just walked away 15 feet away, 20 feet, and a bomb went off, and it knocked me to the ground, and then everybody started running, panicking.
Jonathan Elias from CBS Boston station WBZ was nearby.
And I run over there, and there's body parts. I mean, people have been blown apart.
Okay, I have multiple people down here, okay? I don't know what the cause is. Stand by.
Police rushed to assist victims tangled in debris and broken glass, some missing limbs. Bloody spectators were carried into the medical tent that had been set up to care for fatigued runners.
There were some bad-looking people, and I'm praying for all of them. We are all trying to put pressure on all the wounds for everybody, tourniquets and whatever we could do, and it was chaos.
Runners were directed away from the chaos, and people were ordered to stay clear of trash cans.
Yes, sir, we're going to need more ambulances down to this location, okay?
Yes, sir, they've been notified. They're on the way. We got every unit on possible going, sir.
Edward Davis is the Boston Police Commissioner.
People should be calm, but they should understand that this is an ongoing event, and they should understand that we need all the information that we can get available to us.
Police are not describing the nature of the bomb or giving any specifics at this point, Scott, or whether shrapnel was involved.
Terrell, thank you very much. The Boston police have told us that they believe there were at least 3 bombs, 2 that exploded, 1 that they discovered unexploded and defused. John Miller, former assistant director of the FBI, is our senior correspondent. You've been talking to your law enforcement sources all afternoon. John, what do you know?
Well, there is an individual who is in custody. Now, I want to proceed very carefully from here on out. He's in custody, which means he's not free to go. He's not under arrest. He's not charged. He is a Saudi national who was near the scene of the blast. When the blast happened, he began to run. Now, in context, a lot of people began to run. A civilian who thought that this individual was acting suspiciously chased him down and tackled him, and then turned him over to Boston police saying, I saw this guy hanging around over there acting suspiciously, and then he ran. That may mean a lot, it may mean nothing at all, but authorities that I've spoken to, sources who are being briefed on this say he's being fully cooperative. He's denying any involvement in this act.
So this has been 3 hours that this has happened. A lot of things are going to be thrown out the window in terms of leads as we go forward. The president said we don't know who did this, whether it was foreign or domestic.
Right, and I mean that is to clarify all these reports we're seeing in the media about a suspect in custody. It's too early to call him a suspect.
What is the FBI doing on the ground based on your experience right now?
Well, I've spoken to people up there, and they are pulling this together. So this will be an FBI lead. They will be assisted by the Boston PD and the Massachusetts State Police and the entire intelligence community. The case will be run out of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, which combines all the agencies in the Boston area. The special agent in charge, Rick Delorier, will have the point. It will be monitored very closely by Director Robert Mueller and his National Security and Counterterrorism team at headquarters, and they will be minute to minute on this till they have answers.
And we'll update on the latest information. John, thank you very much. In Terrell Brown's report, you heard Jonathan Elias, a reporter for our station in Boston, WBZ. He was right there on Boylston Street as the bombs went off. Can you tell us what you saw?
Scott, we were not more than 30 feet away from when this blast went off. Let me just sort of set the scene as what was happening at that moment with the marathon. We were a good 4 hours, maybe 4 hours and 2 minutes into the third and final wave. So the crowd, as far as spectators, began to slowly thin. I guess that would be the only silver lining in any of this because they were 10 deep. And all of a sudden, coming across the finish line, we were watching and videotaping some folks, even high-fiving them and cheering them on, and all of a sudden this blast went off. It just shook us in our feet. And we were looking right at where it went off, so I saw the plume of smoke come up off the sidewalk. And we froze for a second, really not realizing what it was. We thought maybe, we have old infrastructure in Boston, perhaps it was some sort of underground gas, something. And the next second, another bomb up the street further went off. We knew exactly what was going on then. We reacted by running towards the scene, and it was a photographer, producer. We were running in, a lot of people running out. We were followed by a lot of EMS, a lot of police running toward that scene, and when we got to the sidewalk, 30 feet away to see what was happening, what was on that sidewalk is something I will never forget. There were people that had literally had their legs blown off. There was a small child, he couldn't have been more than 5 years old, sitting there in upright position. He had a bloody face. He didn't look like he was badly wounded, but at his feet was either his mother or father with a leg blown off. And their eyes were all open. Everybody on the sidewalk that had been injured, they weren't crying out in pain. They weren't screaming for help. They were
Jonathan Elias, we've apparently lost that communication with him. We'll try to get him back, but he was there at the moment that both bombs exploded. By our count, at the emergency rooms around Boston, there are more than 53 people being treated. Many of them are in critical condition. They were rushed to various emergency rooms under an emergency plan that had been set up long in advance. Kate Merrill from WBZ is at one of those emergency rooms at Brigham and Women's Hospital.
Scott, 26 of the patients were brought here to Brigham and Women's Hospital. The head of emergency telling me they range in age from as young as 3 years old to 62 years old. Half of them men, half of them women, and at least 2 are in critical condition tonight. 8 to 10 suffered serious injuries, and they're all seeing a wide range of injuries, all blast-related: severe head, limb, torso injuries, fractures and burns, and eardrum problems, all things consistent with a blast. The hospital is now on a lockdown here at Brigham and Women's. The FBI, the ATF, state and local police, all here. Armed guards are standing outside, which means family members trying to come here to see their loved ones can't get in. Only patients and staff. The head of emergency told me just a short time ago, this is something they train their whole lives for, but is something he himself has never seen, nor could he believe what he witnessed in the ER today. The good news here, none of the patients here at the Brigham have passed away, but they are facing some serious injuries here, and they receive the most patients here at the Brigham. But again, the good news is those patients, many of them having just eardrum and lacerations and fractures, with only a dozen or so with more serious type injuries. But a scene unlike anything these doctors here in Boston have ever seen. Scott, back to you.
Kate Merrill of WBZ. There are a number of hospitals in the area that have received victims of this terrorist attack. The latest we had from the Boston police was that 2 people had been killed. We don't know of any more than that, but Dr. John LaPook has been talking to the various emergency rooms. Doctor, what do you know now?
Well, I know that the number is now closer to about 60 or 61, Scott. We have about 22 at Mass General. We said there were 26 at the Brigham, and there are various other hospitals that are involved also. As we heard, the injuries range anywhere from a punctured eardrum to lacerations to very serious wound injuries. I spoke to the head of the emergency department, Dr. Walls at Brigham and Women's, and he said that there was a serious leg injury, the serious head and neck injury, and of course punctured eardrums that they're seeing. But most of all, he said, in addition to those serious injuries, people were really shaken up. That he said that people were just in shock at having seen these pieces of body parts and something they're just not prepared for.
One of the youngest victims that you know about is 3 years old.
3 years old and transferred to Children's Hospital because they're triaged to very specialty-oriented hospitals, and Children's is prepared to take care of kids that young.
John, best medical care in the world. Thank you. Thank you very much. It is very early in this investigation. It was just a short while ago that we heard the president say from the White House that we do not know who did this, but whoever did it would, quote, feel the full weight of justice, end quote. Bob Orr is in our Washington bureau. He's been talking to his sources about the investigation. Bob, what are you hearing?
Scott, it appears we're dealing here with a couple of relatively small but still powerful bombs that were placed in trash canisters along the marathon route, one near a crowd of spectators at the finish line and one a little further on down the race course. They went off in close proximity, which seems to suggest some planning here. Either more than one person was involved, or it was somebody, investigators figure, who had the time and the knowledge to set these timers in some kind of sequential pattern. We don't know if this is a foreign group or a foreign-inspired plot, or if it's a domestic group. That's wide open right now, and investigators are just starting to go through that. Scott?
Bob, we understand that there is surveillance video that is being examined by the various investigators. We also understand that a third bomb that did not explode has been taken intact by the Boston police and defused. What could all of that mean?
Well, that's very important evidence, potentially. The surveillance video in particular might help identify suspicious people near the area. We know about one man who John talked about who's now being questioned as possibly linked, and we want to emphasize possibly. The bomb, or even remnants of the exploded bombs, could tell us about how the bomb was constructed, maybe even who made it, the methodology that was involved, and that could point us either toward, like an al-Qaeda affiliate, like al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, or more towards a domestic type component. So these are very important pieces of the puzzle as they start down the course of investigation, Scott.
Boylston Street, right in the heart of Boston, is likely to be a shut-down crime scene for quite some time as the police comb the area to look for every single clue that they can find from the explosions. Now, few people have as much experience in counterterrorism as the Commissioner of Police in New York City, Ray Kelly. He is joining us now on the telephone. Commissioner Kelly, I understand that you've put your force on a heightened level of alert. Why is that?
Well, Scott, as you know, we've had 2 successful major attacks here in New York City. We've had 16 plots against us since September 11th. We have devoted significant resources to protecting the city from a terrorist event. So this is what we do. We've done it in the past, and we're doing it right now.
What should New Yorkers do?
Well, New Yorkers should be alert, and we ask them to be aware of their surroundings. If they see anything suspicious, call our resources, call 911, call 311 if it's not an immediate emergency. But you know, as I say, we've had the experience here of significant events and plots against us. So we would hope that New Yorkers are vigilant. We are in the crosshairs of terrorists, and we don't believe the threat has diminished very much. We don't know the genesis of this. We don't know who's responsible for it, but we sort of have to have a 360-degree perimeter in this city and other cities as well, obviously.
Ray Kelly, Police Commissioner of the New York Police Department. Commissioner Kelly, thank you very much. President Obama vowed to bring justice to whoever is responsible for the bombings. We'll have that part of the story when the CBS Evening News continues. Back now with our continuing coverage of the bomb attack at the Boston Marathon. President Obama was briefed at the White House by his Secretary of Homeland Security, Jan Napolitano, and here you see him on the telephone with FBI Director Robert Mueller. Then the president spoke to the nation in the briefing room, and Major Garrett was there. Major?
Scott, the president in his prepared remarks did not call the attack in Boston an act of terrorism. But we just spoke to a top White House aide moments ago who said the president does consider it an act of terrorism and has ordered everyone in the federal government to treat it as such. The unresolved question, the big unresolved question, is this an act of domestic or foreign terrorism? And the president's mandate to everyone in the federal government is build the investigation slowly so the prosecution can be carried out successfully.
We still do not know who did this or why. And people shouldn't jump to conclusions before we have all the facts. But make no mistake, we will get to the bottom of this. And we will find out who did this. We'll find out why they did this. Any responsible individuals, any responsible groups will feel the full weight of justice. Today is a holiday in Massachusetts, Patriots Day. It's a day that celebrates the free and fiercely independent spirit that this great American city of Boston has reflected from the earliest days of our nation. And it's a day that draws the world to Boston's streets in a spirit of friendly competition. Boston is a tough and resilient town, so are its people. I'm supremely confident that Bostonians will pull together, take care of each other, and move forward as one proud city, and as they do, the American people will be with them every single step of the way.
The White House says President Obama will receive updates throughout the evening. The president said that security has been increased in other cities across the country as necessary.
Major, thank you very much. As a precaution, security has been beefed up in New York City, especially in crowded areas, including Times Square, the World Trade Center site, the United Nations, and in the subway system. More than 1,000 counterterrorism officers have been mobilized in New York, in addition to the thousands of patrol officers always on the streets. We will have another look at the explosions and speak with the man who shot the video when we come back. Back now with more on the attack at the Boston Marathon. We don't know who did this, but it is clear that the bombs were calculated to kill and wound as many people as possible, and to do so in front of one of the most photographed sports events in the world-famous Boston Marathon. Steve Silva is a senior sports producer at Boston.com. He shot some of these images of the explosions that we've been showing you, and Steve is joining us right now on the phone. Steve, what did you witness?
Scott, I was at the finish line about 2:50 p.m. getting the runners coming across, the folks running in the 4-hour zone. Apparently there were over 9,000 people still out on the course. I was squared up right on the finish line, and right off to my right, just out of the blue, it was a loud bomb, but it was a thud. There was a thud noise, and smoke went up in the air. And for a split second, maybe you thought, oh, is this some kind of a firework for some runner, famous runner coming across? But then we all, a few photographers, videographers, we ran toward the area, and as we're running, probably under 20 seconds later, the second bomb went off up one block up on Fairfield and Boylston Street. So we knew it was serious, and you can immediately see the carnage and the people and pools of blood and cuts from the glass. The Marathon Sports Building glass flew out of the front window, and then it was just pure chaos, as you can imagine. With we already had medical folks in the medical tent treating, the usual marathon runners, the cramps and such, and now they're suddenly involved in a triage situation, scrambling. I saw one gentleman whose leg was severed off at the knee, taken back, and I know there were more injuries like that.
There was stunned silence after the first blast, and then 15 seconds later, the second. What happened after that?
Just, police scrambling. I think there was just mass confusion, and people didn't, know what the procedure was. Problem was the people that were injured in the blast were on the other side of the partition to keep them off of the race course. So everyone had to pull the partitions away to get to the people, and then, radio the people in the medical tent, and then the police came. But you couldn't get outside help because all the roads were blocked off, and the sidewalks were then thick with about 10, 15 people. So people were just running in every direction but didn't really know which direction to go. It was just pure chaos.
Steve Silva, thank you very much. We will update you with the very latest information that we have when we come back in just a moment. Here's what we can confirm at the moment of the terrorist attack at the Boston Marathon. At least 2 people were killed. About 50 others are being treated in hospitals. Many of them are in critical condition. 2 bombs exploded within about 2 blocks of each other, just 15 seconds apart, near the finish line of the marathon and in the crowd. It happened as runners raced past and spectators cheered them on. Boston police say they recovered a 3rd bomb that did not explode. President Obama vowed that whoever is responsible will, in his words, feel the full weight of justice. But we don't know who might have done this. Much of downtown Boston remains sealed off tonight. The entire area is a crime scene. Some CBS stations will be leaving us now for local programming, but for many of you, the CBS Evening News will continue in a moment. Tonight, bombs explode at the Boston Marathon.
It was horrible. The scene that you saw was frickin' horrible.
There was chaos at the finish line.
It's so terrifying, it's so scary, and there was smoke and glass everywhere.
At least 2 are dead, many dozens hurt.
This is the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley.
Good evening again, and for those of you who are just joining us, this is a special expanded edition, part of the CBS Evening News coverage of the terrorist attack today in Boston. Here is what we know at this hour. 2 bombs went off near the end of the Boston Marathon race as runners were making their way to the finish line. What was to be a moment of triumph turned tragic in an instant. At least 2 people have been killed. More than 50 are being treated in hospitals. Many of them are in critical condition. A 3rd bomb that did not explode was recovered by police. Tonight, a massive investigation is underway. There has been no credible claim of responsibility, and there was no warning. President Obama vowed to find and bring to justice whoever is responsible. Jonathan Elias of our CBS Boston station WBZ was right there at the scene on Boylston Street when the attack occurred. Jonathan?
Well, Scott, our backs were actually up against the grandstand. It's from behind the grandstand that we understand they recovered the device that did not detonate. But if our backs were to the grandstand and literally like right across the street is where that bomb went off, it would probably be the equivalent of, see these guys walking here behind me? That's about the distance it was that the bomb went off. It was 30 feet away at the finish line across Boylston. That's where all the runners were coming across the finish line. Perfect day. The runners were ecstatic that we're coming across the line. We were standing there with our photographer and producer and high-fiving and celebrating with the runners. And in an instant, we heard this blast. It shook us. It really just rattled us. And we see the smoke come up off the sidewalk. And for the first instant, everybody just stood still, not knowing what had just taken place. And within a matter of seconds, another bomb 2 blocks up had gone off. And at that point, everybody knew what was going on. People were running in Boylston Street, jumping into the street and running past us in each direction. And then we ran toward where the bomb had gone off, and we were followed by EMS and some of the volunteers from the race. And there was a barrier. If you can see this fence here behind me, those fences right there were all wrapped around Boylston to keep the runners separated from the spectators. And those fences actually blocked the EMS from getting to the folks on the sidewalk that were hurt. The photographer I was working with, Brian Foley, big 6'5" guy, he grabbed that fence while shooting at the same time and yanked the fence back. And then the scene that we saw on that sidewalk, Scott, it's hard to get your head around. I mean, I saw in all the carnage, there must have been an 8-year-old boy or a 5-year-old boy sitting upright. He didn't look injured, but at his feet was either his mother or his father with a leg blown off. Their eyes were all open. Nobody was crying out and screaming for help. Nobody. It was as though everybody was absolutely shell-shocked in that moment, completely not coming to grips with what had just happened to them. And all around us, there were people with horrific injuries. Legs had been blown off, arms had been blown off. People had internal bleeding. There was open wounds. It was horrible. And there was nothing that really we could do except pull that fence back to let the EMS get in there. But I have to say, had that bomb gone off an hour earlier at the end of the race for the elite runners, they were 10 deep in that sidewalk. But because it went off in the 4th hour of the 3rd wave, you only had maybe 3 or 4 deep in that sidewalk. So there's no silver lining this, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, there could have been hundreds of people. At last check, we know that 90 plus people, 98 people are in area hospitals. As many as 20 of those are critical care patients, and 2 people have been killed. And right now, a lot of people are asking who's responsible. Scott?
And that we do not know yet. Jonathan Elias, thank you from WBZ. Jonathan was mentioning the people who were wounded. They're now being treated in some of this nation's best hospitals, and Don Daler is at one of them, Massachusetts General. Don, what do you know?
Scott, the doctors here are saying that had there not been so many first responders at the scene of the tragedy there to care for the runners, there probably would have been many more fatalities. As it is, though, the people who were brought to places like Massachusetts General in the Boston area suffered terrible injuries. The 2 bombs left scores of injured, the scene reminiscent of a war zone. Medical tents set up for the race were quickly transformed into emergency rooms where nurses treated lacerations, broken bones, and severe injuries to legs and feet.
What really surprised me was the number of people and just the really the amount of blood, the amount of injuries.
One woman had lost her leg, lots of bleeding. Some children were involved as well. And we took care of the ones that we could and got them into the ambulances as soon as possible.
Spectators made makeshift tourniquets to stem the bleeding. This man, one of the onlookers, completely lost his feet. Chief of Emergency Services at Massachusetts General, Alastair Kahn.
Some of the patients have already received traumatic amputations at the scene. Their legs, if you like, are being blown off. This is like a bomb explosion that we hear about in the news in Baghdad or Israel or some other tragic space in the world.
And we know of 3 children at least who were injured, including a 2-year-old boy who suffered severe head injuries. Scott.
Don, thank you very much. It is early in the investigation. About an hour ago, the president briefed the country and said that we do not know who did this, whether it was domestic terrorism or inspired overseas, but he said whoever did it would, in his words, feel the full weight of justice. Homeland Security correspondent Bob Orr has been talking to his sources all afternoon. And Bob, what can you tell us about the investigation so far?
Scott, at this hour, there is no suspect in custody. We are told, though, by officials that there is a young man who they are talking to who, quote unquote, could be potentially linked. But it's very, very early on, and it's far too strong to say this is a suspect. This is someone who was seen near the site of the blast, who was acting suspiciously, and they certainly have to run that to ground to find out if he had any involvement at all. We know there were 2 devices that exploded. They had been placed in trash cans. There are also 2 unexploded devices that were recovered near the finish line. And that could be very important because those unexploded bombs and also the remnants of the exploded bombs could provide the kind of forensic evidence that might eventually tell us who put them together, how they were put together, and where this attack originated. But right now, let's be clear. This is a wide open investigation field. The suspects range from international terrorists to lone wolves inspired by international terrorists to perhaps even someone acting on their own on behalf of some kind of domestic cause. It's in the very early stages here, and officials are running every trap. It's a full court press to find out how this happened, Scott.
And Bob, you were saying to us earlier that there's been no credible claim of responsibility so far.
That's very important, too. There's been not only no claim of responsibility after the fact, Scott, but there was nothing that I'm aware of in the intelligence reporting pipeline in advance of this attack to signal that Boston was any kind of target today. This really came out of the blue. In fact, to give you an idea of how unexpected it was, it took almost an hour for some of the federal agents involved to even get to the blast scene. So this was not on anyone's radar, which suggests it was either very, very carefully planned or it was a very closely held plot by maybe 1 or 2 people, a lone wolf type plot.
Bob, thank you very much. Another reporter who was at the scene during the explosion was Kylie Atwood, a CBS News producer. She was on Boylston Street. And Kylie, what did you see?
Yeah, Scott, I was there. I was in between the two bombs. So when the first one went off, I was directly to the right of it. And we heard a loud explosion, looked around and saw smoke. And that's when we knew that something had gone wrong. We heard screaming, yelling. People started running. And I actually ran in the direction of the other bomb. Unfortunately, ran directly towards that. And that's when we started seeing young children being carried by their parents, being carried by police. We also saw some people on the ground. We saw blood all over. It was a really horrific, scary scene. And right now I'm standing in Copley Square in Boston, and this medical tent is where everyone was brought when they were hurt. And these people are truly the heroes today, because they were the ones who had to deal with everything. And we talked to a lot of people who were not physically hurt, but mentally devastated and panicked by what they saw.
Kylie Atwood, thank you, Kylie. Let's orient you a little bit and show you where Kylie was when the bombs went off, give you some sense of the proximity of the two explosions. The first bomb was right next to the finish line at the bottom of the screen. The second bomb that went off about 15 seconds later was roughly 2 blocks up Boylston Street. The third bomb that did not detonate was also right there by the finish line. Senior correspondent John Miller is a former deputy director of the FBI. He's joining us right now. John, you've been talking to your law enforcement sources all afternoon. What do you know?
Well, either things are going really well or this is going to be very challenging, and that hangs on this individual they have in custody. So let's go back over that. How does this happen? It happens that the first device goes off, the second device goes off, and somebody who's noticed this individual saw him acting in a way that they thought was suspicious. They see him running away from the device. Now, a reasonable person after an explosion would be running away, but this person had noticed them before. This is a civilian now. Chases him down, tackles him, turns him over to the Boston police. The individual who is being looked at was suffering from a burn injury. That means that person was pretty close to wherever this blast went off, but not so close as to suffer the serious injuries that other people did. He is in custody. Authorities tell me he's being fully cooperative, meaning he's answering all their questions, he's denying any involvement. I would say that they're going to be going over his communications, they'll look into his phone, they'll be getting, they'll try to look at every aspect of his life. And they'll want to talk to that person who found him and tackled him and say, what exactly was he doing that was so suspicious? So if that individual pans out, that of course gives the case a big jump forward. If not, then they're back to physical evidence, forensics, witnesses, and whatever they can pick up on those surveillance cameras.
These 2 blocks of Boylston Street, right in the heart of Boston, are sealed off now as a crime scene. What are they looking for?
Well, what they're looking for is what they can pick up about those 2 devices that detonated. What set them off? Were they command detonated, meaning was somebody standing in between them with a remote control? Were they controlled by a cell phone, where somebody could have been watching the finish line on television and detonated? Or were they carefully timed? And that would be a challenge, Scott, to have them timed to go off so close together and to place them in those places without them being detected as suspicious.
What does it mean for the investigation that at least one other bomb was recovered intact?
That is a big advantage, because it is a lot easier to work from a bomb that is intact than it is to piece one together from a million pieces and imagine the parts you can't find. If they have that, the forensic possibilities are almost endless. They could come up with a fingerprint, even one left unintentionally on a piece of duct tape. They could come up with a human hair that matches DNA that they may have taken any number of places. So that would be a big break.
Again, at this hour, we don't know who did this. We don't know whether it's an act of foreign terrorism or domestic terrorism, but the investigation continues, running leads, I suspect, worldwide at this point. John, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The bomb attack in Boston has the organizers of London's marathon looking at their security, because the London race is this Sunday. We have more on that from Elizabeth Palmer. Liz?
Good evening, Scott. Well, both the Metropolitan Police and the London Marathon organizers are watching events in Boston very closely and hoping for information from U.S. authorities that would indicate whether or not there is now an increased risk of attack here in London. The race is due to go on Sunday. More than 37,000 runners have been signed up, and of course there will be many more thousands of spectators along that 26-mile course. Now, the former head of counterterrorism of the Metropolitan Police told us earlier this evening that even if there is no hard evidence of an increased risk, the risk of copycat attacks will be assumed to have gone up. And so the police will go back over all the intelligence chatter they've had over the last few days very carefully and probably even resurvey the route for what they would consider vulnerable areas in case they have to beef up security in those areas. But bottom line, he said, really along such a long course, there isn't a great deal they can do at this stage to make it 100% safe.
Elizabeth Palmer in our London newsroom. Liz, thank you very much. We will update you with the very latest information that we can confirm when we come back in just a moment. Two dead, more than 50 wounded in the terrorist attack today in Boston. Before the Boston Marathon began, there was a moment of silence that lasted 26 seconds to honor each of the victims of the Sandy Hook massacre. And then a little over 4 hours later came the bombs at the marathon's finish line. Terrell Brown is in Boston tonight. Terrell, what's going on now?
Scott, you get the sense as you stand here that police still aren't taking any chances. I've been watching and talking to a security guard that's across the street here. By the way, many of the local businesses along the stretch where we are closed at this hour. And that security guard was told by police to continue checking the trash cans that are nearby, at least on this site. He has been pacing up and down the street. One of those trash cans, it looks like right now, actually being removed across the street. This happening at this very moment. As we take a look here, guys, they have been focusing on these trash cans along this block for some time now. As I mentioned before, police telling security here to look into these trash cans over and over and over again. Don't stop. So I've been watching the security guard pace the block here, looking at the trash cans along the street. It is these types of measures that are being taken right now, again, as police are telling folks here to not take any chances, to keep an eye out. The area is sealed off. That's police, that's fire. We've seen state police. We've seen SWAT teams. We've seen the FBI. We've seen U.S. Marshals, a contingent of law enforcement officials here, as this is still very much an active crime scene. We can't see what's happening. We're just on the periphery here. We're about 3 blocks away from where the initial explosion actually happened, but we've talked to a few witnesses that have described what they've seen back there, Scott, just beyond the perimeter there, and have talked about it being a very active crime scene, even at this hour, Scott.
Terrell Brown, thank you very much. Boylston Street, at least 2 blocks of it locked down as a crime scene right in the heart of downtown Boston, likely to be locked down for some time as federal agents and local police walk inch by inch over that territory looking for any conceivable clue that they might have. It's going to take a while. Other cities have stepped up security in light of what happened in Boston today. We'll have a look at that next. A number of major cities in the U.S. have increased their security precautions. Hundreds of counterterrorism officers have hit the streets in New York City, and Los Angeles is also ramping up its security. Bill Whitaker is in Los Angeles for us tonight. Bill?
Scott, police and sheriff's departments are adding extra security to high-profile locations, including public transit, government buildings, shopping centers, any place crowds of people might gather. There will be an increased police presence at sporting events, including tonight's Dodgers game in Los Angeles, which is a high-profile tribute game to Jackie Robinson. The stadium will be staffed with additional police officers, bomb squad personnel, and bomb-sniffing dogs. Commander Andrew Smith with the LAPD.
Well, we're looking at all our critical sites, of course, as we always do in situations such as this. But in this case, we're also looking at all the events where there are a large number of people.
The Sheriff's Department has activated its Emergency Operations Center, a high-tech command post that consolidates the city's emergency, police, and fire departments. Here, officials would coordinate any response to mass casualty events. And security has been beefed up at airports along the West Coast with more checkpoints, bomb-sniffing dogs, and security officers. San Francisco Police Chief Greg Sir.
This turns the clock all the way back to 2001 again, I think, at least until we find out exactly what happened in Boston, right? So whatever the thinking was on September 12th is now the thinking today.
Scott, there is no evidence of a threat, but until authorities know the nature of those explosions in Boston, they are taking no chances.
Security from coast to coast. Bill Whitaker in our Los Angeles newsroom. Bill, thank you very much. We're going to be back in just a moment with the very latest on the terrorist attack in Boston. Here's what we know at this hour about the terrorist attack along the route of the Boston Marathon. 2 people are confirmed dead. Many more than 50 others have been wounded, perhaps as many as 90, and some of them are in critical condition tonight. 2 bombs went off near the finish line of the marathon today, which is also Patriots Day, commemorating the beginning of the Revolutionary War. The blasts came 15 seconds apart, less than 100 yards from each other. A 3rd bomb was discovered by police nearby and was disarmed before it exploded. This happened about 2 hours after the winners crossed the finish line, after the crowds had thinned somewhat. We do not yet know whether this is a case of foreign or domestic terrorism, but CBS's Bob Orr has learned that authorities are already questioning someone who was arrested at the scene, who was detained at the scene, I should say, and who has been cooperative with police so far. President Obama insists that whoever is behind this will, quote, feel the full weight of justice. Much of the heart of Boston is shut down tonight. Security has been stepped up in major cities from coast to coast. Bob Orr is joining us in the Washington newsroom. Bob, is there any reason to believe that this is part of a larger plot?
As time goes on, Scott, officials are getting increasingly comfortable. They're a little nervous, but increasingly comfortable that this is not part of some wider plot. They would have expected, they say, to see activities in other cities if something were going to happen. Now, you can't take that to the bank, but that is the philosophy they're operating on right now. They're talking to this one person who they've been questioning about a potential involvement in what happened in Boston. But I have to emphasize this person is not a suspect, and I'm told it's way too early even to assume that he might be a person of real interest. Downtown Boston essentially is a crime scene. Agents now are going back along the entire route of the marathon looking for shrapnel and evidence as they piece this together, Scott.
Bob Orr, thank you. That is our expanded edition of the CBS Evening News.